who, when he came to Congress in the second week of January, voted to undercut his position of world leadership, can now come in and effectively challenge him for the highest office in the world? No, they can't do it.
But suppose the president's popularity does remain strong. What does he do with it? Lyndon Johnson used his strength to enact historic civil rights and anti-poverty legislation in the year he rode high in the polls. And shortly after he survived an attempt on his life in 1981, Ronald Reagan proposed sweeping tax and spending cuts.
Isn't it time that we tried something new?
Tonight, this president offered a sense of what he wanted to accomplish on the world stage.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong.
The president's supporters say that's a clear vision.
He's talking about a world order where we are actively promoting the growth of democracy and capitalism, a world order where we are the only superpower, and where we use our power and our influence for a great and noble purpose. And that great and noble purpose is to promote security and peace and freedom.
His critics aren't so sure.
If that's what the New World Order is about, being our brother's keeper all over the world, I don't think that'll work economically because we can't afford it, and I don't think it'll work politically because Americans won't want to do it at that cost.
Another question is whether the president can use his popularity on issues here at home, or even if he wants to. He spoke to that tonight.
Our success in the Gulf will shape not only the new world order we seek, but our mission here at home. In the war just ended, there were clear-cut objectives, timetables, and above all, an overriding imperative to achieve results. We must bring that same sense of self-discipline, that same sense of urgency to the way we meet challenges here at home. We passed a crime bill. It made a useful start in fighting crime and drugs. This year, we're sending to Congress our comprehensive crime package to finish the job.
Well, I want them to solve the crime problem. Everybody listening wants them to solve the crime problem, but we know just saying solving the crime problem doesn't do it. The war on drugs or proclaim something like that doesn't do it. So I don't think he has had a domestic agenda.
And while Democrats cheered tonight, they've been pointing out for some time that they still consider the domestic field their own turf.
It can be environment, it can be health care, it can be medical concerns, it can be child concerns. All of those issues Democrats do well on. My sense is in 1992, they'll continue to do well on them.
Thank you all very much.
Beyond the specifics is the wider question every president faces when the winds of public acclaim fill the ship of state.
Leadership is the act of seizing the moment and going for it. And I think if he doesn't go hard at that, clear, clean, he'll lose that momentum. Not maybe his popularity, but he'll lose a moment.
This is Jeff Greenfield for Nightline.
Later in our broadcast, we'll discuss the political realities of maintaining high approval ratings with one of the most powerful men in Washington, the Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. But first, when we come back, the man President Bush singled out tonight for his leadership role in Operation Desert Shield, the commander of the Joint Arab Forces, Lieutenant General Prince Khalid bin Sultan.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by DuPont.
To protect the lives of firefighters, DuPont developed a remarkable fire-resistant fiber for their clothing called Nomex. But perhaps even more remarkable is how it protects those who never even wear it. At DuPont, we make the things that make a difference.
What makes a child's seat safe is how an adult uses it. To make sure you're using your child's seat right, see an Allstate agent for a free booklet.
and special nights. It's the Nuggets. Special friends we meet again at the Nuggets. It'd be so nice to stay just one more day.
Spring into action. Stay in a beautiful tower room and see a show for just $49. Appearing through March 6th, it's Mel McDaniel. Call toll-free for available dates and reservations.
It's John Esquar's Nuggets. 5-star experience.
It made me furious. Half the time, my statements were wrong. Half my life I spent in teller lines. And half the time, the ATMs didn't work.
Thank goodness I switched to the bank that's first in service. First Interstate Bank of California, the only bank with the extra mile service guarantee. So I get accurate statements, wait less than 5 minutes in main teller lines, find ATMs that always work, or First Interstate pays me $5. Now that's extra mile service.
Switch to #1 First Interstate Bank. We go the extra mile for you, guaranteed.
Thursday, he warned Russia of dictatorship when he resigned. Now, Edward Shevardnadze tells Diane Sawyer what he knew that made him quit. Primetime, Thursday.
Earlier today, I spoke with the commander of the Joint Arab Forces of Operation Desert Storm, Lieutenant General Prince Khalid bin Sultan, from Riyadh. General Khalid had been at the ceasefire talks between Iraqi and Allied officers on Sunday. What was your impression when you met the other day with General Schwarzkopf? What was your impression of the Iraqi commanders? Was it your impression that they were in effect just messenger boys from Saddam Hussein, or were they speaking in their own right?
First of all, surprisingly, they never mentioned his name once in our conversation.
Really?
They are there determined to make that meeting successful and agreeing with everything we said.
Agreeing out of, I mean, what was the mood? Did you sense bitterness, resignation, humiliation? What were the vibrations that you were getting from them?
No, I think the feeling I felt that they were upset of what happened, anxious to solve the problem and agreeing with us based on the United Nations resolutions, trying very hard to prove to us that they are going to do to relieve the prisoners of war as soon as possible.
Do you still feel, General Khalid, that the tranquility of the region depends in some large measure on Saddam Hussein being removed from the political scene?
I think there's other issues has to be resolved to maintain peace in this area.
But the question nevertheless remains, if all these other issues are resolved, could you live with Saddam Hussein as your neighbor a year from now, 2 years from now, or would you always be looking over your shoulder?
I cannot live with Saddam for a second, sir.
You cannot?
No, sir.
So what is going to happen if, for example, as now appears to be the case, he has successfully retained his power and crushed whatever opposition remains in his country?
Mr. Kabul, thank God that, my expectation or my, since 2nd of August, most of it come true, at least if I don't announce it in my private meetings with my staff. Now I can tell you my strong feeling that Saddam will never last more than 2 months from now. You can see that now by this, what happened in Basra or Nasiriyah or another cities. I think the people will more realize when the prisoners of war goes there and tell them exactly what happened and the injustice mission they had just for one-man ego. So I will imagine that people will realize that this man is not helping them or doing something for them. He's just doing it for his personal, unbelievable ego.
How many Iraqi prisoners of war does the Saudi government hold now?
We all have now over 62,000. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the exact number now.
Now, I've spoken to some of the Iraqis, and they have expressed absolutely no interest, in fact, quite the contrary. They've expressed some fear at the thought of returning to Iraq. If an Iraqi prisoner of war says he doesn't want to go home, what will you do with him?
Well, as I promised the Iraqi prisoners of war, which I always refer them to military refugees, I told them that nobody will force them to go to Iraq if they don't want to. But let's leave that to the International Organization for Prisoners, and based on this Geneva Convention, we will do it. And one of the main articles in it is that it's up to the prisoner himself where to go.
How many Iraqi dead are there now? Do you have any way of assessing?
I really cannot tell, and I'm sure that nobody can give an exact number, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it is a big number. I wouldn't be surprised if there are not more than 50 to 100,000.
Dead.
And that's unfortunate. I say it with great sorrow.
You're speaking only of the dead now. What about the wounded?
Well, normally that if you have you multiply it by 2 or 3, but let's hope seriously that this time I'm wrong.
General Khalid, thank you very much for your patience. It was good of you to join us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
When we come back, we'll be joined by the Speaker of the House, Thomas Foley, and by ABC's Senate correspondent, James Wooten, who finds himself tonight reporting instead on the events happening in another capital city, Kuwait City.
Lexus LS400 is equipped with a very sophisticated suspension system, which makes it seem like it's riding on rails, even when it's not.
Zanuck wants your name cleared as soon as possible.
He wants my name cleared of what?
In 1951, the House Committee on Un-American Activities
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
attacked the creative community of Hollywood through a campaign of censorship
You think I would name you? You think I would name you? No!
and fear.
Are they gonna kill you?
You're dead, David. D-E-A-D, dead.
Robert De Niro,
Don't you have an ounce of decency?
guilty by suspicion. Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, March 15th at a theater near you.
All this and the quality of the Mercury.
Nobody beats Home Depot. Nobody. Home Depot will beat any price, any store, any identical item, any day. And low prices are just the beginning. We feature the complete line of Dutch Boy interior and exterior paints. And because Home Depot will mix the color you want absolutely free, it's easy to get the right look.
When you're with us at Home Depot, you feel right at home.
Hi, I'd like an oil change, and don't forget my game piece.
Some people would do anything to play Jiffy Lube's Great American Giveaway.
Parlez-vous Pennzoil?
That's because we're giving away fabulous vacations.
Holy cow.
And thousands of other terrific prizes.
You shouldn't have.
The Great American Giveaway from Pennzoil and Jiffy Lube.
Woof.
Now everyone's a winner.
Jiffy Lube, the Bay Area's favorite oil change. Call for the location nearest you.
Thursday, with an AIDS drug already rejected as worthless, this man continues experiments with it on desperate AIDS babies. Primetime investigates Thursday.
Tomorrow, reaction to the president's address to Congress, then updates on Kuwait, the problems of starting over. Also, Meg Ryan, and Audrey Hepburn on Good Morning America tomorrow.
Joining us in our Washington bureau is the Speaker of the House, Representative Thomas Foley, who made an unusual departure tonight from the traditional introduction of the President.
I wish to depart from tradition tonight and express to you, on behalf of the Congress and the country, and through you to the members of our armed forces, our warmest congratulations on the brilliant victory of the Desert Storm operation.
And joining us from Kuwait City, halfway around the world from his normal beat, ABC Senate correspondent James Wooten. Mr. Speaker, let me begin with you. How convertible is the political currency that the President enjoys right now? In other words, can it be converted to future foreign policy successes, and perhaps even more importantly, can it be converted on the domestic market?
Well, I think it may be partially convertible. I think the President is experienced enough to know that this is probably the high point not only of his presidency, it may be the high point of any presidency in recent years. But certainly the country has come through this war with a sense of renewed confidence in its ability as a nation to deal effectively with a challenge abroad. And I would hope that the President will find ways to draw the attention of the country and the focus and energy of the country in meeting the problems we have here at home, as well as other major foreign policy problems.
Let me tap into your experience, and you are one of the most experienced politicians in this country. How much time does the President have?
Well, to enunciate a domestic program and move it expeditiously through the Congress, I suppose the next 3 or 4 months would be important for him. It doesn't mean that all the programs have to be enacted in that time. He spoke tonight of enacting a crime bill and a transportation bill in 100 days. That can probably be done. There are other major challenges that will take longer. I think the most important thing is whether the President can energize the country to bring the confidence and the force of focus to these problems that was true in the war. We have had a common experience in the nation of enthusiasm and satisfaction over not only the success of the military operation, but the kind of sense of shared experience, of shared success. And I think that's very important if it can be translated to domestic problems.
Can it be translated on the level of bipartisanship? In other words, the President, in effect, staked out such a successful policy, and the military carried out such a successful campaign in Desert Storm that it was all but impossible for there to be anything but bipartisanship. Is there a certain chafing on the Democratic side of the aisle over that?
Not at all. If you remember, as soon as the President announced in August that we were going to send troops to the Middle East and defend Saudi Arabia and insist on the expulsion of and withdrawal of Iraq from Kuwait, he had immediate bipartisan support across the board from the leadership in both parties. There was support for the embargo, support for the use of force to enforce it, support for the UN resolutions. When there was a debate as to whether we should use affirmative force going beyond the sanctions, there was a divided vote. But when the Congress voted to give the President that authority, the Congress immediately came together, including all of those virtually who had voted on the other side of the issue of using force, supporting the troops, supporting the President as Commander-in-Chief. And from the moment the decision was made, this was a united country and a united Congress. Not since World War II has there been that kind of bipartisan support or broad support in the country. And I think it's unfortunate that some people in the Republican Party are trying to make a sort of partisan use of it by redividing, if they can, or trying to create a sense of redivision in order to use it for some future election. We've got a long time before we go into another election. And I think this sense of strong national unity should be mobilized to deal with domestic problems. That'll be the best politics for both parties.
Jim Wooten, it looks like a miserable, blustery day there in Kuwait City. I know, however, that you were able to listen to much of the President's speech. You want to comment on what you heard, or you want to comment on what was missing?
Well, one of the things that struck me as I tried to listen from this distance and put myself, say, in the average Kuwaiti's shoes listening to the speech, which he didn't hear, one of the things that struck me was what was not said. I think most Kuwaitis would have agreed with most everything the President said in his speech tonight, up until the point where he said Kuwait is free. And at that point, I think many Kuwaitis would have wanted the President to be a little more specific, to fine-tune that definition, because Kuwait is clearly not a free society, not in the manner that we're accustomed to a free society. It's a rather benevolent oligarchy, and before the war was becoming less benevolent all the time, rather miserly with things like freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and the rights to vote and things like that. So one of the things that people have to keep in mind about the free Kuwait is that it isn't the same Kuwait now that it was before the war. There's a lot of confidence here that eventually, after a lot of money and a lot of hard work, that the house that Kuwaitis once lived in can be rebuilt. Expensive, big, and beautiful, but the family that lived in it is not the same anymore.
Let me ask you this, Jim. To what degree do you sense that Kuwaitis are expecting the United States to pursue the campaign a little bit further? And I'm not now talking about an anti-Iraqi campaign. I'm talking about the campaign of holding the ruling family's feet to the fire and saying, we didn't send young Americans over there simply to expel Iraqis. We sent them over there in the interests of democracy. Although I must add, parenthetically, that is not something the president ever said during the past few months.
Well, most Kuwaitis that I've talked to, Ted, frankly, are very pessimistic that the United States will put much pressure on the al-Sabah family, the ruling family, the Emir and the Crown Prince, and much of the power establishment here. Most of the Kuwaitis I talk to believe that if change is to come, democratization to any degree, it will have to come from inside. And many of them are quite willing to pursue those goals.
During the few seconds we have left, Mr. Speaker, let me turn back to you and ask you whether you think it is an appropriate American mission, now that the immediate mission has been met in that part of the world, to push democracy on these countries.
I think to push democracy may be too strong a word. I think we ought to encourage it, and I think we ought to particularly encourage a more forthcoming attitude in Kuwait and perhaps in Saudi Arabia concerning their promises to be more open and generous in the political processes of the country. We can't force that. We have no leverage to force it, but we certainly can give it our encouragement and support.
You say we have no leverage. Isn't something owed to the United States and, for that matter, to the other coalition partners?
Well, I think there's a sense of gratitude, yes, but I mean, we have no positive means of withholding or granting anything that would produce this in any absolute term. All we can do is give our advice and counsel and encouragement to these developments. But I think it will be a matter of interest in the United States if the promises have been made in Kuwait, for example, to return to the previous constitution and to restore a measure of parliamentary democracy are kept.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Jim Wooten, thank you. I'll be back in a moment.
This is KPIX Eyewitness News at noon.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Holman, sitting in for Liz Gonzalez. Topping our news today, U.S. forces are in the air again. This time, their destination is home. More than 100 members of the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division are half a day away from their Georgia home base. Many are still wearing the sandy desert fatigues worn in the 100-hour ground battle. Peter Vazant was with the troops on the first leg of their journey home.
They had fought on the front lines in the war against Iraq. 6 of their friends were killed, 19 others wounded. This morning, these soldiers from the 24th Infantry Division became the first to leave Saudi Arabia, the first to go home.
Just great, ready to go home. My wife, who's pregnant baby's due in about another 2 days, so I might make it home in time.
I stayed up all night. I couldn't sleep. I was throwing stuff out, and just getting rid of stuff. I get so happy,
The happiness of going home was tempered by the knowledge that not all the soldiers who came here survived, that for some, there would never be a homecoming.
We took some losses in the action, and that's sort of a bitter pill right there. But at any rate, everyone did their job, and we're ready to get home.
The 24th Infantry Division was among the first into Saudi Arabia, training in the searing desert heat. They're the first of 7,000 troops expected back in the U.S. over the next 2 days, including the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, the Air Force 1st Tactical Fighter Wing, the Navy's Hospital 5, and 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marine Corps Regiment.
7 months is too long for me. I ain't gonna lie about it. Too long. I want to go home. I want to see my wife. I want to see my family. I just want to see them all.
The initial goal is to get 15,000 troops back to the U.S. by the end of the week, but it may be many months, possibly as long as a year, before all 540,000 U.S. troops are back in the state. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Tehran.
And the homecoming celebrations aren't far away for some of the people working on the hospital ship Mercy. Pentagon spokesman Pete Williams delivered the news they and their friends and family have been waiting to hear.
It's 400 people who served on the USNS Mercy, who work at Oakland Naval Hospital. They'll arrive at Travis at 2:15 p.m.
Personnel will be flown into Travis while the ship stays in the Gulf for a bit longer. The Mercy has been on duty for the past 6 months. Fortunately, the 12 operating centers and 1,000 hospital beds weren't all needed. Right now, the Mercy is caring for the American soldiers formerly held hostage by the Iraqis. This is only the second time the ship has been used since being transformed from a tanker to a hospital.
Maintain her in a level of readiness that will allow us to activate her, if required, within about 5 days and sail her to meet a contingency. Hopefully, we will never have to do that again.
Again, some of the medical personnel from the Oakland Hospital have been aboard USNS Mercy, are coming home tomorrow at 2:15 at Travis Air Force Base. They'll be bused from there back to Oakland. Still missing at this hour, nearly 3 dozen journalists. But if a report from a Red Cross official is true, some of them may soon be free. The official told CNN that 20 journalists being held in Iraq would be turned over to the Red Cross, perhaps as early as tomorrow. CNN also quoted the official as saying the list would include 2,000 Kuwaitis taken hostage as Iraqi soldiers fled Kuwait. Now that the battle is over, top U.S. officials are once again heading to the Gulf region. This time, talks center around post-war compromise. Secretary of State James Baker left this morning for Saudi Arabia. He'll spend 3 days with Saudi King Fahd and foreign ministers from 6 other Gulf states. He'll work on long-term security arrangements. Baker will also bring up the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Those talks aren't expected to sit well with the Israelis. Today, their foreign minister admitted the United States and Israel are split on how to work toward peace in the Middle East. David Levy also said too much pressure on his country could drive peace away. Israel is opposed to the land for peace settlement, which the U.S. and Palestinians favor. The war isn't over, at least inside Iraq. Opposition forces say fighting against Saddam Hussein has now reached the capital city of Baghdad. Disease there also could take a large toll. A UN official says as temperatures rise, so do chances of a typhoid or cholera epidemic. In Kuwait, for many, the day is spent waiting in long gasoline lines. That starts forming at dawn. The wait is worthwhile, at least. All the gas is free, and that's at least for now. And finally, a sign that the Gulf region is putting the war behind it. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations are once again giving weather forecasts. They were banned during the war because it was feared they could help the Iraqi military.
7th Corps prepared to leave Saudi Arabia. There were some ecstatic families at Fort Stewart, Georgia last night to welcome home the first soldiers from the 24th Mechanized Division. Secretary of State James Baker began his post-war peace mission in Saudi Arabia today. He goes to Israel on Monday. Baker says he'll meet with Palestinian leaders there if they want, but so far they have not asked. And finally, a program note tonight on 2020, Barbara Walters with Margaret Thatcher, the world's most powerful woman until she was forced to resign. 2020 tonight at 10 Eastern Time. And that was a quick look at the news. Here's Spencer. Have a good weekend, Spence.
All right, Mort, thank you.
This is KPIX Eyewitness News at noon.
I'm glad to be home. You know, we're going to have a good time here. I'm glad to see this green grass, too.
Cheers and tears, a scene that will be repeated in the days and weeks to come as Desert Storm troops make their way home. Good afternoon, I'm Liz Gonzalez. This day has been in the making for the past 7 months. The first large group of American soldiers sent to the Persian Gulf is now home. And in the next 24 hours, nearly 4,000 of the 540,000 troops sent abroad will be reunited with their families and friends. The long-awaited journey begins in the Saudi desert. The first person to send them off is the same man who led them on their victorious mission against Saddam Hussein and the Republican Guard.
It's a great day to be a soldier.
This morning, General Norman Schwarzkopf gave a final review to the Army's 7th Corps. In his farewell tribute, he saluted them and said how proud he was of the job they had done.
You were determined to show a petty dictator that they just can't get away with bullying their neighbors and taking what they want because they think they're so tough.
Dozens of other combat soldiers and Marines are still traveling to Riyadh, the first point of departure on the trip home. These lucky troops are among the first, but for others kept behind to clean up and maintain peace, the homecoming could be anywhere from 6 months to a year away. Fortunately, some Bay Area families won't have to wait that long. Their loved ones are just a couple of hours away from being back in their arms. Manuel Ramos joins us from Travis Air Force Base, where more than 400 medical workers from the hospital ship Mercy will be arriving soon. Manny?
Well, Les, we're told that the veterans should be arriving about 1:30 here at the airfield at Travis. This will be the first wave of 3 waves of returnees that were serving on the U.S. hospital ship Mercy. Now, we're expecting this first wave to be about 420 officers and corpsmen who were mobilized for Desert Storm. They left Bahrain on what has been called the Navy Hero mission flight. Because of security reasons, we haven't been allowed on the airfield just yet. A lot of people around here can't believe that these people are already on their way back, but they're very grateful for it. Now, remember that Travis was the site of so many of the departures, and I can tell you right now, I was there at the time, the mood is a lot different, a lot more up. No word yet if any of the family members will actually be on the airfield waiting for them. They won't be allowed to talk to us here. The veterans will be taken right off the plane and put on a bus and then start heading toward Oakland to Oak Knoll Hospital, their home base. Now, waiting for them there will be a lot of people for the big homecoming. Les Trent, our Les Trent, will be there to report on that. As a matter of fact, he's there live right now. Les?
Well, Manny, we are at Oak Knoll Naval Center, or Naval Hospital, rather, where the troops will be coming in from the USNS Mercy sometime early this afternoon, or probably around 3:30, 4 o'clock. They're going to gather behind us in this building, the Community Service Building. Clearly, the building's a little too small for the expected 1,500 people they think will be in attendance here, so things are going to spill outside, and they're actually going to close off some of the streets here at the Naval Hospital. The USNS Mercy, as was mentioned, left in August, and it had its share of problems before it got out of the bay, you'll recall. It was out in the bay overnight, and then it came back to Oakland because of reportedly some mechanical problems, and also they wanted to return some of the hospital personnel, at the time explaining that the hospital operations would be adversely affected by all of the people they had taken from the hospital ship. It did eventually, of course, set sail, and as many as 400 of the medical personnel in the USNS Mercy expected back here at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital this afternoon. The first of 3 waves, 2 more waves of returnees tomorrow and on Sunday. The Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet is expected to be here as well to help welcome the members back home. Family members are...
It's back to regular duty on Monday. The Air Force is also sending home some of its troops. Just a few hours ago, some 500 members of the 1st Tactical Fighter Wing landed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. A cheering crowd, many waving flags and banners, were there to welcome home the pilots who helped achieve air superiority in the first weeks of the war. And this proud and impressive group is the 82nd Airborne. They came marching home on the tarmac at Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina. The state's governor welcomed them, saying the liberation of Kuwait was one of the greatest victories of all time. And he promised a big party in honor of the troops. At that, the troops broke rank and headed for the open arms of waiting families. American troops, thousands of Kuwaitis taken from their homeland, were free today. Eric Enberg has their story.
Against a backdrop of burning oil fields, the Iraqi buses made up a convoy to freedom. In a sudden move, the Iraqis were releasing hundreds of Kuwaiti citizens who had been grabbed as hostages after the Allied invasion. The Kuwaitis were dropped at a desert checkpoint near the Iraq-Kuwait border. There, the American Army took over.
There's enough Americans around here, you don't have to worry about that anymore, okay?
Some needed medical treatment from Iraqi abuse. This man, suffering from a broken back and fingers, needed reassurances the Iraqis could no longer hurt him.
You're in Kuwait. You're safe. In Kuwait. Okay? You're all right.
The Kuwaitis, warming their hands against the desert chill after they were left with the army, had been held in Iraqi prisons in Basra and other towns near the border. 300 of them had been held in one cell, 120 by 15 feet.
So there's no way everybody can sleep by stretching his arm or his leg. He has to sleep on his friend.
And this, the sort of bread that they were feeding us. You can feel, how heavy it is, like a rock. Look, that's, the bread. Okay? The water, is undrinkable.
After their release, they were convoyed home by the U.S. Army.
Hey, it's great. It's a party, isn't it?
Yeah.
Biggest party in Kuwait right now. I like it. Everybody's going home.
In the community of Jara outside Kuwait City, word of the homecoming spread quickly. Concern for the safety of an estimated 6,000 hostages has hung over the heads of Kuwaitis since the war ended, dampening the liberation celebration. Now there is hope the nightmare may be over. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Kuwait City.
The Red Cross is still waiting word on the release of 40 missing journalists and 2 American soldiers. Earlier, 2 American CBS television newsmen were returned to U.S. military control. Pentagon officials put the total number of foreign journalists still in Iraq at 38, rather than Baghdad's estimate of 40. Secretary of State James Baker is in the Middle East to talk about the future of the region. He will be meeting with key players in the Allied coalition, but he has also offered to meet with Palestinians while he is in Israel next week. He hopes to inspire some, quote, confidence-building measures between Israel and the Arab states, but won't say how he plans to do that.
They were trying to get some sort of official military convoy to go down Route 80 and into Oakland to Oak Knoll Hospital in Oakland, where there is an official celebration, an official greeting with the families, and an official meeting with the media where Admiral Kelly will address the media. But as you can see, there are a lot of people here who I think will prefer to drive their loved ones down that way themselves, and it's a matter of getting them back here, but I think they'll worry about that when the times come. Plane just taxiing up after landing about 5 minutes ago. They will be coming down. There will be a short greeting by Admiral Kelly on board the aircraft, and then they will come down to a tumultuous roar as it builds, as the plane gets closer and closer. Of course, the first troops arrived in the United States last night on the East Coast, Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. Number of air bases today. Welcoming the troops back from Desert Storm, and one of the big forms of greeting is a huge bucket of ice with beer and pizza nearby. Of course, alcohol was prohibited in the Persian Gulf, and so trying to get back to their American ways, get back to a taste, as it were, of America. And one of the more joyous scenes you're going to see ever right here.
Lon, I can only imagine what those families are feeling right now, being the child of a military man coming home from Korea and from Vietnam. The feeling must be incredible. Have you had a chance to talk to the families yet?
Yes, I did, and actually one who had promised to come over at this time, and I don't blame her. I think she forgot all about us. She said she is thrilled to death. She's got a small child with her, a lot of small children here to greet their fathers, to greet their uncles, to greet their brothers, and it is, as you say, you can imagine, is just elation beyond belief. And I don't think many of them got much sleep last night. This plane came from Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, stopped in Bangor, Maine for customs and refueling. A lot of people got phone calls from their loved ones when the plane was in Bangor, Maine. And so they had a taste of what this will be like, but I'm sure nothing like what it will be like, Cheryl, because there is not anybody here who is just feeling the emotion, the electricity through the air at this moment as this plane taxis into Travis Air Force Base.
It's hard to tell, Lon, whether or not the doors are open, but we could very clearly see that big yellow ribbon around the door.
There are a lot of them here, and as we drove closer and closer to the air base, we saw a lot more of them. We see a lot more of them anywhere we go, actually, particularly around the air stations down in Mountain View. I live in the South Bay, and I see a lot of them down there at Moffett Airfield, and actually a few of the Naval aircraft flew into Moffett Field last week already, returning from the Persian Gulf under a news blackout. And so technically these are not the first to arrive in the Bay Area, but certainly a large public gathering, and it's the first of its kind here on the West Coast. Most of the 1,200 members of the Mercy actually are coming back with the ship. There'll be another contingent of them coming back on an airplane, but there are about 400 here, maybe another 400, but a lot of them, about 500 we're told, will sail back with the ship Mercy, and that could take up to 5 months to get back, so kind of anticlimactic for some people, but once those people from the Mercy arrive, it will certainly be another joyous occasion at any point, at any time, no matter how big, no matter how small. this happens to be the first one, so it is special in that sense, but for any loved one who has a member in the Persian Gulf returning, it will be special indeed, I am sure. As we said, about 400 on board this Continental aircraft, 747, about half active, about half military reservists who played a large part in Operation Desert Storm, and a volunteer army mixed together, and they did a marvelous job, and these people here are very proud of them. We were here back in August and September when the first reservists were flying out of Travis Air Force Base to join the other troops in the Persian Gulf, and it is quite satisfying to be here when they come home safe and sound. A lot of the people on the Mercy did actually see some action in a sense. They were stationed there to treat casualties, and while they did treat a lot of casualties resulting from, as they called it, horseplay, a lot of sports activities from trying to pass the time, they did treat some shrapnel wounds, some superficial wounds from the air raid time of the war. They did not treat any of the wounds suffered from the ground war. So luckily for them, and luckily certainly for all of the troops over there, they were relatively idle a lot of the time as far as treating casualties, and that goes a lot towards saying the job that they did over there in the Persian Gulf.
Lon, do you have any clue as to how long the folks on this plane have been flying?
I'm sorry, Cheryl, could you repeat that?
How long have the folks on this plane been flying to get home?
Well, we were trying, they took off yesterday, 2100 Zulu time, and I haven't had time to get on my calculator and figure that, but when I was here last fall, they were saying it was about, a 16 or 18 hour flight, I believe. So with the stop over in Bangor, Maine, that probably lengthened it just a bit, but they have some comfortable seats, I'm sure, not like some of the C-130s where they can take a lot of crew, but the accommodations probably aren't as luxurious as they might be on a commercial airliner. But as tired as they may be, as hungry as they might be at some point, I'm sure all that is already has gone by the wayside now that this has touched rubber to the tarmac, and here come the first troops. American heroes, each and every one.
It's interesting to see, Lon, that they are all wearing civilian clothing. For some reason, I guess I thought they would be in uniform.
I did myself. There were a lot of uniformed personnel here at Travis Air Base, but perhaps some of the restrictions may have been let go just a little bit, but there are also a lot of civilians on here being reservists, and I don't know officially if their duty is over yet as reservists, but that could be the case as well.
And you can see that a lot of them are carrying American flags as they come down and waving them at the crowd, who I imagine is waving right back at them and cheering and clapping. I have to tell you, a big cheer and applause went up in the newsroom here as we saw the first pictures of those men and women coming off that plane.
Well, we are taught to be subjective, objective observers, but it's hard not to be subjective at a time like this. There is a great deal of pride in these people and a great deal of pride in the country, and it's hard not to feel that when you're in this atmosphere, Cheryl.
Earlier on the network news, Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney said that around 4,000, maybe a little more, of the soldiers, men and women, will be coming home today, and he is hoping to get some 5,000 out a day over the next few weeks.
With about 540,000, that was his goal, and whether or not they're going to be able to attain that goal, he says that they certainly will strive to attain that goal, and he thinks that they can. That is a lot of airlift, and there'll be a lot of action for the air crews here, probably from Travis Air Force Base. A lot of the air crews have been used just in shuttling troops back and forth, and with 4,000 or 5,000 a day, they, as I mentioned before, they'll hopefully be able to get them all back here by Independence Day, July 4th. And they're going to board the buses that are off to the left of your screen, if they can get them out of the clutches of their loved ones, the loved ones who will not drive them down to Oak Knoll Hospital in Oakland. And then they will convoy on down, and that is where the official reception area will be, but I don't know how it could beat this. I think these people are going to be greeted with this type of reception anywhere they go, whether they are in a group or whether they are walking around by themselves. They're certainly going to be a source of pride for a lot of people.
I don't know how many of them have been able to keep up on the news or even wanted to keep up on the news while they were making that journey home, but as they are coming home from the duty they had to do in the Middle East, the Secretary of State James Baker is in Saudi Arabia as we speak, planning meetings with King Fahd and also with the Emir of Kuwait, who is still in exile in Saudi Arabia. So there is lots of movement still going on in the Middle East as our soldiers come home.
Well, I think they don't know exactly what their plans are in the Middle East for military personnel. There was certainly hint that there will be some sort of military presence in Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf for some time to come, maybe as a watchdog sort of group. It's been explained to me as sort of a situation there is in Germany right now and in Korea with American troops, both of those places, and that is certainly something that is forgotten for the time being. No precise timetable has been set for the return of the military members in the Persian Gulf. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney not wanting to hand out any timetable because they really didn't want to get the hopes up of any family members who, or even military personnel who may be stationed over there, because it would be very hard to probably live up to those precise timetables. Some of the wives actually have been staking out certain air bases across the United States. I don't think there are any in the situation like that here today at Travis Air Base, but some wives who have no idea what flight their husband will be coming back on, but they know they'll be coming back to that certain air base. And so they are just waiting, hoping that their husband will be on the next flight. They'd have to stay there a long time. There will be other flights coming in here to Travis Air Base. This is just the first in what will probably be quite a few flights coming onto the West Coast here at Travis Air Force Base, but as we said, there is no timetable, there is no schedule. When they hear that his wheels up on the other end, they get the call here and they scramble and they try to get the word out to as many families as they can.
Lon, as we're taking a look at the last of those soldiers coming off the plane, I just got word from the control room that those folks have been flying since 1 o'clock our time yesterday afternoon. So they've been in the air traveling for a long time. You know, they are ready, as one family member said, for warm hugs and cold beer.
I think you're exactly right. I think underline on both, there's been lots of cold beer being popped throughout the air bases of the United States in the last 24 hours. And I think they will enjoy any type of Americana they can get their hands on. And they're certainly getting a taste of it here. And it's not stronger than anywhere here at Travis Air Force Base right now, Cheryl. They're just having the time of their lives. Probably, you know, you go to the airport and you see reunifications there, but this is a bigger airport than anyone I've been to, and a greater unification of families than I've ever seen. It's quite a sight here, and it's wonderful to see. We're going to be seeing this all day long, I'm sure, in the Bay Area as they head down, take the hour, maybe a little more than an hour or so drive down to Oak Hill Hospital for the official celebration and welcoming home of these men of the hospital ship Mercy. Lots of children, lots of American flags. This town of Fairfield is a military town, and they are welcoming home their heroes that have gone. Reporting live from Travis Air Force Base, I'm Lon McCarran. Cheryl, back to you.
All right, Lon, thank you very much for that excellent arrival and the talk up to all of that. Good news for folks in the Bay Area. Many of the troops who are stationed in the Persian Gulf who've been there for the last 7 months are now on their way home. They've been flying for something like 24 hours. They just arrived. Many members from the USNS Mercy just arriving at Travis Air Base on that Continental jet with the big bow over the door. We will be following the travels of those folks who just arrived, the soldiers, those men and women, this afternoon, and we'll bring you updates as we need to, and of course a full wrap-up of all the day's events on Channel 7 News at 5 and 6. Thank you so much for joining us for the arrival of the troops from the Persian Gulf, the first group of American troops. Thank you for joining us. We will now rejoin the
This has
network.
been a special report from Channel 7 News.
Reports. This is the coast road north of Kuwait City leading to the Iraqi border. In the last hours of the war, it became another highway of death, another Iraqi getaway route gone hideously wrong. This is the unsanitized face of war, The flip side of the successful sorties tallied in what was called the KTO, the Kuwait Theater of Operations. The wreckage goes on for miles. Even silent and still, it is a picture of grotesque violence, unspeakable sadness, of widows and orphans, of loss.
I hope everybody sees this and gets the feeling that it's not a clean business.
Sightseeing. American soldiers take pictures, as if they could ever forget these sights. A man who has crawled under his truck to die. Clothing and ammunition, unexploded bombs strewn everywhere. The scavengers are busy re-looting what the Iraqi soldiers had looted from Kuwaiti homes. Soldiers who ended up with nothing, not even their lives. This tank was hit by a cluster bomb. From the looks of the wreckage, the Iraqis were driving straight toward their attackers, and at least got a glimpse of what was coming their way. Frozen in time, how they reacted in those last moments, trying to escape across an oil pipeline or to save one of Saddam Hussein's artillery pieces. In vain, as U.S. planes bore down on them.
It's a road to hell. It's the road that he built. He should be here to see this.
Well, these guys were soldiers, and they didn't have to die like this. They were just trying to get the heck out of Dodge. These poor guys should be back with their families.
Soldiers who will be going home soon can only look solemnly at other soldiers who will not. Martha Teichner, CBS News, near the Iraqi border.
Representatives of some 30 Iraqi opposition groups are in Beirut, Lebanon, for a conference on how to force Saddam Hussein from power. A spokesman for the more than 250 delegates said they will never negotiate with the Iraqi leader. They demanded he be tried for treason and war crimes. Coming up on the CBS Evening News, how the
Saddam fights to stay in power. Will he survive? And will he resort to the use of deadly chemical weapons? We'll hear a first-hand account of the chaos as we bring you the latest on Iraq tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel reporting from New York with the latest on the Persian Gulf, Forrest Sawyer.
We are once again in the position of trying to piece together what may be happening inside Iraq. Rebel groups who have banded together in an uneasy alliance against Saddam are claiming victories in the fighting against loyalist troops. Some refugees say the loyalists have the upper hand, and no one has any idea what's going on inside Saddam's Revolutionary Council. The only thing that's clear now is that the once monolithic power structure that was Saddam's Iraq is tearing at the seams. Factions, some loyal to Saddam, some loyal to Iran or Syria, some loyal only to their tribes or their ideology, are struggling for a piece of that power. All this while the U.S. and its allies, who forced this civil war, stand back, saying it's inappropriate to interfere in Iraq's internal affairs. Is that wrong? Should the U.S. intervene? And what are the chances of Saddam's survival? First, Nightline correspondent James Walker.
With Saddam Hussein facing the most serious challenge in his 12-year rule, opposition leaders from 23 different factions gathered in Beirut today to coordinate their efforts to overthrow the beleaguered president.
It is not a Shiite revolt, it's not a Kurdish revolt, it's a simple Iraqi nationalist revolt against a mad dictator.
ABC News correspondent Charles Glass reported on the start of the three-day meeting from nearby Damascus, Syria.
The Iraqi opposition in exile is trying to prove to the people inside that it's been doing something and that it is doing something to help them. Some of these people have been outside the country for 20 years, while Iraqis inside have been suffering and dying under the regime.
The 325 representatives of outlawed Iraqi secular and religious groups demanded that Saddam Hussein's forces stop massacring rebels waging an 11-day battle inside Iraq.
There are about 500 people had killed in Karbala yesterday.
How were those people killed?
How? By tanks.
The rebellion began in the city of Basra, which had been hard hit by coalition bombers. The uprising spread throughout the southern Shiite Muslim heartland to the mountainous Kurdish north. Most recently, Kurdish rebels report crushing Iraqi army units in 2 northern provinces. Similar reports came today from the U.S. State Department.
Since last week, opposition activity seems to have increased in the Kurdish areas of northern Iraq. Although fighting continues in several locations throughout southern Iraq, the overall levels of unrest appear to have declined somewhat in these areas.
Rebel efforts have received a boost as a result of important defections, says State Department correspondent David Enzor.
Ever since the civil unrest started in Iraq, there have been reports coming from refugees escaping from the areas where the fighting is going on, that there may be Iraqi army soldiers, regulars, fighting alongside the rebels. Well, now State Department officials say they have some evidence to corroborate that claim. They say that the rebels have acquired mortars and some other weapons, which they could only have gotten hold of with the help of people in the Iraqi army.
For days now, Iraqi refugees fleeing their homeland have told stories about the fighting.
They're hitting houses with heavy artillery, missiles. Families are dying, entire families.
Some refugees say they've seen Iran's hand in the uprising.
The opposition forces, they call themselves the Islamic Revolutionaries. They are working with the Iranian government.
Indeed, ABC News chief European correspondent Pierre Salinger says Syria has asked Iran for help.
We've learned from a top source that Iran-backed Hezbollah guerrilla forces coming from South Lebanon have gone into Basra and are participating in the uprising against the Saddam Hussein government. We've also learned that probably some 3,000 Revolutionary Guards from Iran are also participating in that war, which shows that Iran is involved in what is going on in southeast Iraq.
The Iranians hate Saddam with a passion. There is no one they would rather see be eliminated in the world than Saddam Hussein. So this is their opportunity.
The revolt inside Iraq has also prompted fears that Saddam might resort to chemical weapons, as he did against Kurdish rebels in 1988. Some claim the order has already been given to pro-Saddam forces in southern Iraq.
Messages intercepted saying don't hit these places with artillery, because artillery would show in the future also what happened to these places, but use perfume. Use perfume when every Iraqi knows perfume means chemical weapons.
This afternoon, the Iraqi mission to the UN released this statement denying having used or intending to use chemical weapons inside Iraq. White House correspondent Ann Compton says Bush administration officials don't believe it.
Today, the White House said it is sure the chemical weapons are there and have been moved up into position where they could be used, and that's why the administration is making such threatening noises. If there is any use of chemical weapons, it will bring down more air attacks on Saddam Hussein's head.
So one war has in effect been replaced by another. While Saddam's opponents may now be linked by their desire to drive him from power, it could prove a unity that's only a means to an end. And the end, some analysts suggest, could be in Iraq more like Lebanon, with the Kurds controlling the north, the Shiites setting up an independent south, and an army controlled by the Sunnis trying to regain overall authority. Hardly a formula for stability. This is James Walker for Nightline.
And when we come back, we will talk with Neil Conan, a journalist just released from captivity in Iraq who witnessed firsthand the factional fighting in and around Basra. And with Samir Al-Khalil, an Iraqi expatriate. Amman, Jordan, is National Public Radio defense correspondent Neil Conan, who was among 38 journalists captured and held last week by Iraqi government forces and in New York. Samir Al-Khalil, an Iraqi expatriate and author of Republic of Fear, The Politics of Modern Iraq. Mr. Khalil, a longtime critic of Saddam Hussein, uses a pseudonym. Mr. Khalil, a lot of us, or all of us really, are kind of groping in the dark trying to figure out what is going on in Iraq. So how about if you take a shot? As best you can tell, how do things seem to be shaping up there?
I think we're looking at the beginning of a human catastrophe in the weeks, months to come. We're looking at a country that's falling apart and possible loss of life far exceeding anything that we've seen so far.
Well, the speculation, of course, is whether Saddam can survive or not, whether his loyalist troops will be able to put the lid on what's going on there. Do you think he can?
I think it's one perfectly likely outcome, although it's by no means certain. I think the situation is full of uncertainties at this time.
Well, sort through me, if you would. You have a real sense of these various factions. Now, they're meeting in Beirut. They appear to be putting at least the veneer of unity. Is there any real unity there? Can they pull themselves together against Saddam?
They can pulled themselves together by focusing on his ouster, but at this point there isn't an agreed program, and that is a perfectly understandable thing given the state of Iraqi politics and the complete vacuum of any ability to think a political thought in Iraq for the last 20 years.
Well, I think what a lot of us are facing is real confusion as to what's going on there. Give me, if you can, a primer on the way the groups are arranging themselves and how they are trying to achieve what they are trying to achieve. Are they operating by themselves?
I think, by and large, they're genuine Iraqi groups. Of course, everyone is starting to put their oar in particular Iran. I think that they will succeed in agreeing on opposing Saddam Hussein, and that's at this point that's the central thing that they're trying to agree on, including tactics on the ground. But I think that they are unlikely to come to much because we're dealing with a country that doesn't have a communication network, that doesn't have a way of practically achieving any kind of coordination, neither for the regime nor for those opposition groups that are fighting him. We should remember that this revolt going on is started as a spontaneous affair and is probably not controlled by any one person. No group really knows what its left hand is doing from its right.
Neil, I want to come to this remarkable journey that you went on and some of the harrowing experiences that you had inside Iraq. But first, if you would, give me an assessment of what you saw. You were with the Republican Guard for a period of time, and that in itself is remarkable.
It was a pretty amazing journey. I would say that south of Basra, there were Iraqi regular army groups that were, well, our estimate was that they were operating sort of as banditti. I mean, they were very independent, and then for them to get us to the Republican Guards, we had to drive through parts of Basra through various army checkpoints, which did not want to let us through and fired their weapons to prevent us from doing it. We just kept on going, and then saw a bit of the fighting, and people were firing over the car and back and forth, and that's why communication between those army groups south of Basra and then the Republican Guards who were up around Basra University was non-existent, and there were no radios or anything like that. And then as we drove north from Basra, we were involved. We saw a lot of the fighting as far as 60 miles away. So it's really anarchic. It's chaos all through there.
You were only able to see that little bit that was in and around you, so it would be difficult, I suppose, for you to determine who was trying to gain the upper hand.
It was. The Iraqi army officers we spoke to toward the end of last week were saying they had reestablished control, that it was all over, and in fact the Republican Guards outfit that we were with moved from Basra, where they'd been shelling the city, and were moving north. They were having some difficulty moving north because the guerrillas made that very hard, and there's only one pontoon bridge operating over the Euphrates River, and that was a focus of fighting. It's where we were ambushed. So communications are very difficult, but I would suspect that they thought that they had regained the upper hand in and around Basra and were moving to put out fires elsewhere, though I really question how long they're going to be able to keep doing that.
You heard Mr. Khalil talk about what a lot of people have said, and that's the human cost of this war is going to keep rising and rising, in part because the infrastructure has simply been destroyed completely. Did you get a sense of that with what you saw?
Absolutely. There's no power, there's no clean water, there's no sanitation whatsoever. Obviously no telephones or anything like that. We would see women coming out of the villages dipping buckets into mud puddles to get drinking water for their children. The troops got their drinking water the same way, or they drank the very brackish water from the river. It was cool and wet when we were there, but when the weather heats up, dysentery, starvation are going to be a major problem, and I think are going to kill a lot more people than have died in any aspect of the fighting so far.
The question is, I suppose, Mr. Khalil, whether this cost was a necessary one to achieve what the UN resolutions called for. Do you think so?
I think this cost was way in excess of what was required to push the Iraqi army outside of Kuwait. The cost, it will be remembered as such. Iraqis today feel that they are the ones who are being asked to pay the price for the dislodgement of Saddam Hussein. They are paying the price, the people as a whole. The bombing was directed at them, their infrastructure, they're the ones who are suffering the loss. This is a country that has gone brain dead, to use the phrase that a United Nations relief agency worker just described it as. It's as though you had the skin completely intact and you broke every bone and you cut every tendon and you cut every nerve inside it. It's rotting and festering inside. and it seems to me that those who crippled it have a responsibility towards it.
When we come back, we're going to talk about what that responsibility might be and where Iraq is moving. We're also going to hear Neil's remarkable story in just one moment.
Are they going to kill you?
Nobody's going to kill me. Guilty by suspicion, the critics are testifying. Smart and impassioned, De Niro delivers a galvanizing performance.
I'm being followed by the FBI everywhere I go.
Brilliant and powerful. The performances are terrific. A must-see movie. Robert De Niro, Annette Bening, George Wendt, Patricia Wetty. Guilty by suspicion, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, March 15th at a theater near you.
What makes a child's seat safe is how an adult uses it. To make sure you're using your child's seat right, see an Allstate agent for a free booklet.
Tresor, the fragrance for treasured moments. Tresor, the new fragrance from Lancôme, Paris. It must be at Macy's.
And the award goes to Robert Morse.
Robert Morse, in True. He's won them all. The Drama League Award, the Drama Desk Award, the Outer Critics Circle Award, and now the highest honor the theater can give, the Tony Award for the Best Actor of the Year. This year, it's Robert Morse in True, the performance you just gotta see.
True at the Current Theater, March 12th through April 7th. For tickets, call 243-9001.
All this and the quality of the mercury.
When this man claimed to be Sidney Poitier's son, he was welcomed into celebrities' homes and parties. Now they claimed they were conned.
I was fabulous.
Primetime, Thursday.
A lasting peace in the Gulf tomorrow. What will it mean to Israel?
Also highlights of the joyous homecoming for U.S. troops, plus Oscar nominee Richard Harris on Good Morning America tomorrow.
We are back with National Public Radio correspondent Neil Conan in Amman, Jordan, and author Samil Al-Khalil here in New York. Neil, it was last Monday that you and Chris Hedges of the New York Times decided to jump in a car and head out from Kuwait City up into southern Iraq to see what was going on around Basra. And I can appreciate that because I was there too and I wanted to go, but my camera crew slapped me around the head and shoulders until I came to my senses. Now, what made you think that that was going to be an idea that would work?
Well, I talked to Juan Tamayo, who'd been up there, of the Miami Herald, who'd been up there the day before, and he said there were a lot of refugees coming out of Basra who you could talk to, and there were a lot of stragglers from the Iraqi army on the roads who you could talk to, and that it was very porous. There was no real structure there, so that we thought we could maybe probe around at an outside chance, get into Basra and see what was going on, but at least get a first-hand account from refugees and soldiers about what was going on.
Well, you were aware that there were loyalists all over the place, and all you had to do was fall into the hands of one or two of them to get yourself into trouble.
True, but we thought, maybe we thought we'd be lucky.
So what happened?
What happened was we were pulled over. I mean, we talked to a lot of these stragglers. We didn't see any refugees coming out, and that probably, in retrospect, should have been a tip-off. And then we were pulled over by a car from... There's several cars we talked to and various troops, but this one pulled us over, and it was just, there were no questions asked, AK-47s put in our faces, and we were jacked out of the car and thrown into the back of a Jeep, and our car and the Jeep were driven into an army camp, and there we were interviewed by this, this